Hello, everyone. I am Michael Steelman, Director of Alumni Career Development and Professional Engagement for William Mary. It is my pleasure to welcome you to Day 2 of William Mary's 6th Annual Professional Development Week. William Mary is your career partner for life. The university has committed to lead the preparation of lifelong learners, equipped to navigate rapid change and thrive from their first job to their last. This week of programming, designed for the entire William Mary community, will cover a variety of topics relevant to people at all points of their career journey. When designing the sessions, we focused on the NACE career competencies, which are career and self-development, communication, equity and inclusion, leadership, professionalism, teamwork, and technology. We are truly grateful for the continued engagement of our William Mary community to support one another's professional success. I want to acknowledge and thank all the William Mary volunteers and colleagues who expressed their willingness to help on One Network, have taken the time to prepare remarks, advised us on topics and are serving as networking event hosts throughout the country. Without your guidance, support, and expertise, this week would truly not be possible. I'm joined today by my colleagues and co-planners, Kelly O'Shaughnessy and Alex Beard, who you'll hear more from later on in this session. Before I turn things over to our panel, I just have a few technology items to cover. Today's session is being recorded, and we will do our best to get this recording up online as soon as possible and notify all registrants once the recording is available. Also, questions are welcome, and our moderator, Phil Heavilin, will address as many questions that time will allow. Just roll over the Q&A icon below in the Zoom menu and just put your question in the Q&A. We'll also monitor the chat as well throughout the hour. Now, I'm delighted to introduce our incredible panel joining us today to discuss ascending leadership from intern to executive. First, we have class of 2007 alumnus James Ambrose, who is the Director of Investor Relations at Microsoft. Next, we have Lydia Lee, class of 2024, current student majoring in human biology at William Mary. Next is Royce McAllister, class of 2007 and Director of Corporate Development at Ticketmaster. Next, we have Jane Raleigh, Director of class of 2013 and Director of Dance Programming at the Kennedy Center. This terrific panel will be moderated by my colleague and Director of Internships and Applied Learning at William Mary, Phil Heavilin. Whether you are just getting started with your first internship experience or in a position where you manage interns, we hope today's conversation will encourage you to think about ways you can recognize and capitalize on your personal strengths and the strengths of your team to achieve organizational goals. Without further ado, Phil Heavilin.
Great. Thank you, Michael. I appreciate that introduction. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us. We appreciate you taking the time to be a part of this conversation. And just to emphasize some of the things that Michael said, we really want this to be interactive and engaging. Please use the Q&A functionality to drop in your questions. We'll make sure we get to as many as possible. We're excited for this conversation, and we wanted to create an experience that was reflective of the diversity within our attendees. You all come from different parts of the country, the world. You're at different stages of your career. Some of you may be current students or recent graduates, so you're just starting to really think about what those next steps might be if you're going to be graduating here soon. We also have mid-level managers who perhaps are in their first leadership role and kind of wondering what this whole managing others, setting a vision is really like, and what do I need to accomplish here? And then more senior level folks who perhaps are in a position who, maybe they want to give back and share their experiences with others. And so we have, I think, a panel that reflects, the spectrum of experiences that I think we have in our participants as well. So really excited for this conversation. We have a really stellar panel from really interesting backgrounds. It's fun to read all of your bios because you kind of point out things that you sort of wish you did too, but never got around to. So, I think some of us will be living vicariously through your lives. And I'm excited for all of the experiences and the guidance and advice that you'll be able to provide your fellow alumni and students and friends of William and Mary. So ascending leadership from intern to executive. sort of implies this time, this span that typical individuals have in their career. And every stage brings opportunities, but also a whole slew of questions and considerations about how can I position myself for that next step? If I'm an individual contributor, how can I position myself to be considered for a leadership role? What is a good leader? What do those qualities look like? Who are my mentors or those role models that I find really exhibit the qualities that I hope to also have as a leader in my industry? And also the importance of internships. We'll talk about that. I mean, after all, I'm the director of internships and applied learning. So we really need to talk about the importance of internships. And there's some compelling data that was recently released that I'll touch on soon to sort of set the stage for that conversation. All of you panelists have had some really terrific internship experiences. So curious what the impact of those experiences have been on your career. We'll also kind of touch on balance as well and the importance of balancing once you have that leadership role and all those responsibilities now laying on your shoulders. How are you balancing those responsibilities and preventing that workout? I'm sorry, that overload, really, that burnout. So let's kick it off with the first question. And this is sort of a kind of a level setting question. And that is when you think about leadership, especially effective leaders in your life and your experiences, what are those qualities that you have observed those leaders exhibiting in their respective roles? What are the qualities that kind of stand out for you in terms of effective leadership? And I'll just open it up to any panelists, and then we'll go from there.
I'm happy to jump in first.
Thanks, Jane.
I think to me, there's sort of two qualities that stand out to me and that I am working on trying to embody in my leadership. The first and I think most important is like an actual listening ear, someone who is asking questions of their staff and those around them and legitimately hearing the responses that come back. And then doing something about it. There's nothing worse than thinking that you're sharing something with a superior and then it doesn't go anywhere or you never have a follow-up after. So listening and then taking action based on what you hear. And the other, to me, is something around decision-making. I don't quite know how to articulate it. But I once was told about in a session, we were talking about the difference between management and leadership. And it was described as managers are people that understand all the tasks that need to be done and execute on those things. Leaders are people who are listening and aligning everyone to a shared vision or a shared goal and then executing on that. So I think when I think about good leaders I've worked for and less good leaders, the good ones are the ones who have aligned us all on one shared vision and then actually like hit the go button to take us there.
Oh, that's great, Jane. Thank you for that. Royce?
Yeah, piggybacking off at least one of those, I thought those were great, was around having a listening ear. And I think that goes towards like developing a point of view and crafting a vision or developing a vision. I think, important if you're leading a team, whether that's a handful of people to 1,000, is just to have an informed, crafted point of view and vision, and then being able to articulate it and communicate it to the whichever stakeholders. It could be your employees, it could be investors, it could be other stakeholders. And then what I'd also add is around talent, being able to identify and develop talent within your organization, because as you go from an individual contributor up to a manager and to a leader, you're increasingly doing less, hands-on keys type of work and more relying on your, the people supporting you, driving and executing. And so I think as you grow in your career, continue to be able to have a good eye for talent and effort and work ethic, and being able to develop those as well. I would say key.
And I can hop in next. I would say super fascinating, because last night I sort of jotted down a few bullets to respond to this question, and literally they are empathy, energy, and vision, which I think are, very highly related to what, has been said previously. I think the empathy is all about that listening ear and that taking action, right? Like really putting your team members above and beyond yourself. And I think of that sort of as a hard line. Like if you are a leader and you're not prioritizing the folks that are, following you over yourself, then I'd almost say get out of the way. You're not doing what you need to be doing. More nicely, given that you're probably in a position of power, but literally I would find a way not to work for you over time if I truly felt like you weren't putting your my needs ahead of yours. Energy, which I really think as manifesting itself through the culture that you create. I've been on high performing teams that were draining and not sustainable. I've also been on high performing teams where I was excited every day to get up and come into work and do my best work. And once you've been in both of those situations, it's a no-brainer which one that you would prefer over time. Like it is not a requirement to be drained and beaten down in order to do great work. And then the third one, that vision, I think that's around the decision making, that's around understanding how the team is successful. And I really find it manifesting itself through the ability to share context. That's one of the most important things that I've found over time from leadership is help me understand why we are moving in this direction. Why are we making these decisions in ways that are compelling, in ways that are durable over time, and it doesn't feel like every day we're sort of marching to the beat of a different drum. And so just super fascinating to hear the level of overlap between the responses so far.
I can kind of finish up. I think everyone kind of touched with a lot of really good qualities. I also was looking through the questions last night and wrote a couple of things down. The two words that I have is empowerment and accountability. I really like the empowerment one because something that I look for in a leader is ways for me, myself to grow. And a good leader would kind of empower me to grow in different fields and gain skills, whether I want these skills to be developed further or even just like develop even newer skills. And then accountability kind of goes in different facets. So accountability as in the team can depend on the leader, but also that the leader holds the team accountable. I think it goes hand in hand. So those are two things that I would associate with an effective leader.
Yeah, that's great. Well, I hope folks are taking notes, because if they're applying for their next leadership role, these are all keywords that should be on their resume and their cover letters. Really fantastic insights. Yeah, I mean, so many things that you said resonated with me when I think about, effective leadership. You're always taking care of other people, and I think that's one of those next steps when you become that leader of folks is they want to feel secure that they're almost taken care of. And I really like James' comment around there's going to be information that you're going to have that your colleagues will not, and may not understand some of the decisions that you're making that are strategic. Because they just don't have access to all that information. So having that clarity, that openness, that accessibility goes a long way to get your team rallied behind the vision, right? And I think you all kind of touched on that. And listening, I think James said listening, asking questions, boy, that can be hard. I mean, oftentimes, when you're elevated to a leadership role, you've been a really effective individual, right? You're really good at your job, and having to now oversee perhaps functions that you're not the expert can be very disorienting and take a hit to the confidence. And so really, trusting your team, asking those questions, listening, being vulnerable to the fact that you just don't know. I'm not the expert here. You're the expert here. And kind of circling back to, I think, what Lydia said in terms of empowerment, that really does empower your team to to run with the vision if you position them for that kind of success. So really, really fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. And so kind of piggybacking off of, now we have these qualities that kind of stand out for everyone, and kind of reflecting on your careers up to this point. If you can kind of think about individuals and provide an example perhaps of, you know, when there was a time that a leader in your life served as a kind of a positive example for you. And selfishly, I'll mention an example as you kind of think about yours. You know, I chose my career to be in higher education because of an experience I had as an undergraduate student. Working on campus, and my university president at the time in my alma mater, Dr. Allison S. Floyd, was, the best way I can put it, evangelical when it came to the power of higher education and the impact on lives and communities. And I drank the Kool-Aid that Dr. Floyd was dishing out. And he went on to be president of University of Missouri and then Washington State. And sadly, he passed away just before COVID from cancer. But I have a picture of Dr. Floyd in my office. And I oftentimes look at Dr. Floyd, and when I have a hard decision to make, and I ask myself, what would Dr. Floyd do? What would Dr. Floyd say? Just because he was just such an effective communicator and really did a great job, you know, sharing that vision of what higher ed could be for our communities and what it can be for our students. And I always look back to Dr. Floyd as my example. But I'm curious if you have perhaps your own Dr. Floyd or Dr. Floyds in your lives who sort of engendered some of these characteristics that you so nicely described for us.
I can start with this one.
Yeah, Lydia.
I have a leader in one of my experiences that is in this panel right now, Kelly. So I'm currently a student career advisor, and Kelly O'Shaughnessy is my supervisor for a team of 4 of us. And when I listed empowerment, I will say that is like, Kelly was the first person that came to mind for that. She's done a really good job. I've been working under her for 2 years, and at the beginning of each semester, we have one-on-one meetings, and she asks for us to identify skills that we want to improve on, goals for the rest of the semester, and then strategies to go through with those goals. And she's a great communicator and very transparent about the expectations that she lines for us. And my favorite part is reflecting upon the last semester and like how we've improved. She is very good at giving feedback and good at communicating with the team about what she expects from us and how we could improve in our roles. And so I would say she's a very significant part about my college experience, both professionally and personally. She's been a great friend, giving me book suggestions on chicken noodle soup for college students, I think. I don't remember the actual name, but definitely a great influence for the entirety of my college career. And I know that she's going to be someone who I will keep in mind throughout my professional experience.
That's wonderful. And she didn't put you up to this, did she?
No, she did not.
That's wonderful. Very nice. I
I
think
can,
Royce.
yeah, I can jump in here. So I started my career at GE Energy, started in a 2-year rotational program, financial management program, and then graduated from that and joined GE's water business. This was in 2010. So I had a boss or manager there, Tara Axler, who I think has been pretty instructive for me as how I've approached leadership since working for her. And what I found most compelling, and it's kind of stuck with me, is how she really empowered, to Lydia's earlier point, really empowered me early in my career. I think I was 3 years in my career and maybe a little timid still. And I think that came across in how I would present, during meetings, going through a pitch. she said that so she said that I sounded monotone, right? And so in addition to empowering me to like present more often give me more reps, so to speak, she also gave me specific feedback, and a push was that if you don't drive more energy or have more energy, I'm going to make you present like a Disney princess, like in that type of high pitched voice, right? Which I didn't want to do that in front of a 1,000 engineer organization or, her boss or what have you. And so, she was just very specific. And I think that she saw, I guess, to an earlier point around talent, she saw that, maybe had the technical skills, could do the work when I was talking with her one-on-one, could deliver, and that just needed a little push, right? And a little bit of feedback. And, from there, she, would put me in front of the CFO of, GE Power and Water business, who, receives pitches from everyone. And, that's how she kind of showed her trust in me. And so when I kind of think about those lessons, I think about, how she empowered me, was very specific in feedback, really got to know not only myself, but the rest of her team. And the other thing I'll add is that and I've seen this in other leaders that at least I've been connected to, is that like flatten the organization in a sense where we're working side by side. Like I'm very comfortable and know that, she can do my job better than my job and than I could, for example, and that she could also, pitch up to, senior leaders as well. Right. And so I think being like multi-level, a multi-level communicator, I think was what I found really impressive. And that has kind of stuck with me. And I've since then been, tried to align myself with leaders with a lot of those similar qualities where possible. So.
Great, Royce, thank you. Very concrete, feedback from that leader. That's super beneficial. I do not want to present as well dressed up as anything really.
Yeah.
I'm happy to share. I think I have a bit of a unique situation because of the 10 years that I've been working in my career professionally. 9 of them have been within the dance programming office at the Kennedy Center. So I actually started as a coordinator just 2 years out of school, and I've grown up through the department to now be director. And a lot of that is really due to the boss that hired me into the team. Her name's Meg Booth. And she, very similar to what everyone else is saying, a key part of the role of the director of dance programming is to curate our ballet offerings at the Kennedy Center, which is really fun and interesting, but also is like a really specific, there's very few people in the dance field nationally who actually have curatorial oversight over a dance season. And so similar to what you're saying, Royce, as I was learning the technical skills of how to execute these dance performances, there wasn't really opportunity to practice that creative curatorial piece of it. And Meg found opportunities for me to do that. We had some local dance offerings on a free performance series that we have called the Millennium Stage. And very early on in my time in the team, Meg empowered me to curate that. And the actual decision power is still laid with her, but she really gave me the full control over curating that local dance series. And then she would have final stamp of approval on it. Which then led and opened the door to a whole bunch of other skills that naturally weren't part of my job description, like budgeting for those seasons, learning the technical advance of how to do the behind the scenes lights and sound work that went along with that, all of which were actually building skills to eventually become the director. So then when she left the Kennedy Center, she actually pulled me into her office and said, "Are you interested in having my job? Here's what I think you would need to do to get it, and I'll advocate for you to apply for it." So really, I owe so much to her to have ended up in this position. And it really set the tone for how I hire people, how I talk to people on my team now about just what you were saying, Lydia, of like, what skills do you not have that you want to have eventually? What parts of my job do you not understand, so that we can add those to your annual goals so that you can start to shadow me on those things and eventually take them over. Because I think, like you were saying about leveling that out, I know how to do the jobs of the people under me because I did them. And I want them to eventually take my job, which is, of course, the ultimate goal.
Yeah, and I can wrap up pretty briefly on this one, but I would say that mentorship and having folks like this in your life has been foundational for me, like even before I was a professional. And so I can think back from, being a preteen and having people advocate on my behalf and help me to gain experiences. So when I was at the university, I could name 5 mentors easily, several of which are still there, to my entire 15 plus years at Microsoft, having had important mentors throughout. And for me, when I think about it, I don't necessarily frame it as any one single experience with these people. It's really been much more just how do they carry themselves? How do they go about their day-to-day work? And then sort of me holding a mirror up to myself and saying, am I living up to the examples that were set for me, is really the way I think about it. And then I think also in the comments from the other panelists, you do get into this dynamic of like mentorship and or sponsorship and the importance of having individuals that are not only going to give you that coaching and that feedback, but over time will move into a position of where they are actually advocates on your behalf, whether or not you actually know about their advocacy. And that is a very important dynamic over time as you grow in your career. You will get to a place where there's only so many spots to do what you want to do. And the differentiator is not some sort of pure, this person is clearly better in every way. It at a certain point comes down to who's advocating on your behalf. And so those are just some thoughts I would add to the broader comments.
Great point, James. And thinking about the title of our panel, Ascending Leadership, it's a journey that you can't do solo, and you need those mentors, those champions, sponsors, to be able to advocate for you when you're not in the room, right? You often kind of hear about that, and that analogy, someone who is actively working with you on identifying maybe those gaps, giving you opportunities like Jane to develop in skill sets that might scare you. Finance doesn't scare Royce, scares me. And I would certainly need some coaching, someone to be there, say it's going to be all right. And you need that. You need that to get to the next level if that's your career goal. And I want to circle back on something Jane said and kind of connect it to our next kind of question topic, because we do have some younger professionals, even students who I think are watching or may watch the recording, and thinking about how you might maximize your experience through internships and what the impact of internships and other types of kind of applied learning experiences have really done for you as a professional, how it's kind of set the trajectory for your careers. And something I want to kind of share to kind of tee up this idea. A report was published this month called Talent Disrupted, which is a report from the Burning Glass Institute and Strada Education Foundation. And it was a report on kind of the extent of underemployment that college graduates have in today's market. But one of the factors, one of the variables that they discussed was the impact of internships. And it really was profound in terms of what internships did for students' career trajectories, not just immediately after school, but 5-10 years down the road. And so, the stat that I wanted to kind of highlight was that, and I'm quoting here, that the odds of becoming underemployed after completing a bachelor's degree are 49% lower for students who reported having participated in an internship as part of their college education, 49% lower, and that completing even a single internship, so just one during college, substantially enhances a graduate's access to college level jobs. And so, the data around internships is really clear in terms of their value for helping students understand and get exposure to different career options. Even internships that you don't like can be very informative. But I'm curious from you all, and especially you, Lydia, as you're kind of thinking about that next step and what your internship experiences have kind of helped you, think about what you might want to do after school. How has internships impacted your career trajectories?
Yeah, I can definitely speak to this one. I have done an experience pretty much every summer between the college years. And the most recent one, I am currently majoring in human biology, and I've always been interested in like clinical work. I've been involved in my volunteer fire department since age 16. So I've kind of known that I've wanted to work with patients. And so I've worked with like as a PT tech and as an EMT. And within those experiences, I've noticed that I really like communicating with people and being surrounded by people. But this past summer, I actually reached out to a William Mary alum who is involved in research because I thought that I might be interested in that. But actually, upon actually doing the internship, I realized that I may require a little bit more social interaction, and my extrovert was being a little bit suppressed because while I really enjoyed the lab experience, I didn't enjoy the fact that I was limited to like the 5 lab assistants and mentor that I was with. The lab was in a basement, no windows. And I did get close with my lab team, but I realized that something that I really value in my experiences is talking with different people and like learning from different experiences and forming those connections. And I don't think I would have been able to realize how important that was for me if I didn't have the 3-month summer experience. So I'm really grateful for that internship because of the fact that this is something that I didn't realize was like a big factor. Um, I also realized that I really need time outside and windows in my environment. Um, so yeah, I think this is really a good example for just trying different experiences out. And I always tell students that I advise that like every experience that you have is a step in one direction, whether it is positive or negative. If it's a negative experience, at least you know that that is a negative experience and something that you don't want to pursue. And it kind of chisels out a little bit of the clay block, if that makes sense.
Absolutely makes sense. Job search is tough and there's a lot of decisions to be made. And so if you can sort of chisel some things away from the block you have to think about, very beneficial. James?
Yeah, I can piggyback off of that. I think as I was thinking back on this one, I had opportunities in undergrad to intern at like PricewaterhouseCoopers for a summer. That was an amazing organization. The summer before that, I interned at Hex as a merchant executive intern as it was turning into Macy's. And so that was super cool as well. But the one I tend to go back to the most is actually one of the informal internships I did when I was like, I don't know, 12 years old. And this came about from one of those mentors I was speaking of, who's a woman I went to church with. She actually ended up being the officiant at my wedding in the Wren Chapel, Go Tribe. But I interned at the Ritz-Carlton and I got to go through sort of this very like junior internship thing with like real people who were actually like starting their careers. And I can still remember things like the credo was, we are ladies and gentlemen serving ladies and gentlemen. Or there was like feedback that when you're talking to a guest, you never say, I'll be back in a minute, because that's definite and you can actually disappoint them if you're back longer than a minute. So you say, I'll be back in a moment, things like that. But to me, what you really learn from these internships is just like the culture of organizations and what makes organizations either super successful and great to work in and work for, or to Lydia's point, you can find out that things are not exactly what you're hoping for in your career. But it's to me that broader experience and that exposure to hopefully multiple organizations and people within those organizations, that to me is where a lot of the value of an internship is, more so than we're going to specifically train you how to do this job, and when you're finished here you'll know how to do this job. Your job's going to evolve, like it's really, and you're going to evolve. It's much more about the what are some durable lasting takeaways about how an organization runs from my point of view.
James. Royce?
Yeah, so I've had, I guess the benefit of being an intern at the ages of 19 and 20, and then also when I was 30. So the first one was when between my sophomore and junior year and junior and senior year at William & Mary, I interned at SunTrust Bank up in Richmond doing commercial banking. And then I guess most recently, going to business school at Columbia. Between my first and second year, I interned at an investment bank called Moelis & Company out here in LA. And in each situation or internship, I think it's important to recognize that it's two-way learning. Or to James's point around, you're learning about the culture of the organization and they're learning about you, right? And so I think pretty important to understand the job that you're tasked with doing and how that might connect to the, if there's a job on the other end of it, full time, you should be hopefully doing something close to that and know if you really, really are interested in it. And then, using that time to talk with different people. I would say at any point as an intern, you could probably grab time with most people and just ask them anything, whether they would love to take you to lunch, or for coffee or what have you, right? And so I think using that opportunity to learn about the organization, learn about the job, learn other people's path through the organization, to their point and all that, I think is pretty important and pretty instructive. And for me as an intern, taking a step back, I mean, I found I was able to learn more in a 10-week, 12-week internship than doing coursework, frankly, for me. And so I think important to do, whether it be summer internships in semester, in school year internships, if those are, fit within your schedule, because I think that, hands-on learning is really how I found, my, fit from a profession and from a culture-wise at a different organization. So
I just want to build on that, Royce, that I've found that informational interviews work at any age. You actually don't have to be an intern. And I did that recently. I just reached out to someone and was like, can I take you to lunch and ask about your life? And they were like, of course. So that's a new hack that I didn't realize was available to all humans all the time. I'd say the internship I think about the most was one that I actually had between freshman and sophomore year at William & Mary. And I was a Hispanic Studies major at William & Mary with a focus specifically on the language. And I was wanting to become a Spanish interpreter. But all of my extracurriculars were arts related. I did a cappella and orchesis and symphonichron and was just dancing and doing theater and singing all the time. So that summer, I went to the American Dance Festival in Durham, North Carolina, and was a behind the scenes production intern, like hanging lights and pulling ropes and stuff backstage, really just for the opportunity to have proximity to dance because I thought it was cool. I didn't really think it was a career path. But there was a company that came from Argentina that summer that traveled without a stage manager. And my internship supervisor said to the full group of interns, is there anyone that speaks Spanish or knows how to stage manage? And there was nobody that knew how to stage manage. And I was the only person that spoke Spanish enough to communicate with them. So he told me, I'll teach you how to stage manage if you can play interpreter with this company. So I then basically stage managed a professional gig, which is crazy thinking back on it. But he taught me how to do that. Then I came back to school and went back fully on my path to Spanish translation and interpreting. And when I graduated, I had a bunch of internships lined up in that Spanish translating track. And to your point, Lydia, I did 2 of them and really hated both of them. Like, it was really not the thing, but that was the path I was on. And that old intern supervisor called me and said, hey, what are you doing? This Argentine company is back in the US and needs a stage manager. Are you free? And I literally just like dropped all my internships, was like, absolutely, and flew to Miami and worked with them for a month while they were in the US. And it totally changed my path. And as soon as that was over, I applied to only arts jobs. And my next job was an internship at the Kennedy Center. So just the random language skill I had because of my major totally changed the career path that I now am on.
And the rest they say is history, right, Jane? Sorry, Lydia.
I wanted to piggyback on what Jane was saying, Jane and Royce were saying about informational interviews, because the lab position that I was talking about actually started out as an informational interview. So as mentioned before, my first involvement, or I guess I mentioned this in my bio, in the Zoom bio, my first involvement with the Career Center was the first ever professional development academy. And through that, I learned skills about networking and LinkedIn connecting. And so from that, I did it over COVID or during quarantine. And so I connected with a William & Mary alumni and kind of just kept up that like connection. So we did like an informational interview over Zoom. And I kept it up throughout the years. You know, I took a class that he recommended me to take, kept talking with him. And then around this time last year, I emailed him and was like, I'm looking for something to do this summer. And just from those email correspondence, he wrote me like a recommendation letter for this internship program, ended up like getting me this great, I was willing to do it volunteer, but he ended up getting it to me for paid. And so definitely taking advantage of like the William & Mary alumni network on the grounds of like One Network. I'm involved in One Network, and I actually have an informational interview today with someone in an organization that I want to work with. So kind of following along those paths of making advantage of William & Mary and the resources and like networking and how it can provide you with other resources. And like Jane said, may even change the trajectory of, you know, your path. So I'm looking forward to maybe my path being changed a little bit.
Great. Thanks, Lydia. Royce, did you have something to add or?
Yeah, I was just gonna add just one thing about internships is that we oftentimes will think, okay, do the internship at the company that you want to work at ultimately or full time, which if that works out and it's a good fit, then yes, great. You can also think about it in a sense of like amassing different experiences, broadening your network towards another job, maybe similar. To that point, when I did my business school internship at Moelis, or going into business school, I was very focused on doing investment banking within media and technology. And, Moelis in LA, their primary practice was doing media and tech M&A advisory. And so targeted them, was able to join them for the summer and was able to work on a deal that was in the college sports space, college sports marketing, that, I was able to, given the speed of the deal moving very quickly and working very hard on that, I was able to see nearly end to end from the deal. And although that I did not ultimately go to Moelis, I think the experience of having been there, having that real kind of meaty transaction experience was like helpful towards me ultimately landing where I did full-time after business school. And so I think important to think about it as like building blocks and stepping stones and as another experience. And though if you end up working there full-time, also very good. So.
That's true. Gosh, I mean, so many great points here. I couldn't possibly summarize all of them. But really interesting to hear your stories on how these experiences have really, if you hadn't gone through them, you quite possibly would have done something very different trajectory. But also it goes to show just that the power of these internships. And I think, for the employers, for those who, the statistics that I shared earlier, while industry experience is great, they're just looking for experiences that you're having where you're developing some of these key competencies. And we talk about NACE competencies, National Association of Colleges and Employers. These are competencies that they say, look, this is what we're looking for in new grads. And whether you develop those skill sets in this setting or not, if it's transferable to us, boy, it really makes you that much more employable. So you can see why these internship experiences are just so powerful on so many levels. So thank you for sharing your experiences. I kind of wanted to go back a bit, but before, so I want to just remind people, Michael had put in the chat, if there's someone who had an impact on you, definitely share that. We'd love to hear those personal stories. Or if you have questions for the panelists, definitely use the Q&A to drop those questions. We'll make sure we get those to the panelists for responses. But I wanted to move forward with, kind of going back to this notion of as leaders, again, whatever stage you're at, having to, really depend on those around you. You're no longer that individual contributor, pounding the keys, as it was kind of alluded to earlier, but you are depending on others. And so I'm curious from those who have hired new team members, who have, try to build culture within your organization. What's your perspective? How do you do that? How do you do that effectively? Building a team. Again, it's one of those things where as a new leader, that can be challenging to kind of get your head around. Okay, how do I manage other people? Now I'm responsible for how people feel and the culture of the organization. If people are working effectively with each other, and if they're not, as a colleague, you can sort of write it off. I'm just going to head down, do what I need to do, and take care of business, and that's okay. But as the leader, now you are, responsible for the outputs of your team. I love Jocko Willick's extreme ownership book, where no matter what, it really boils down to you and your effectiveness as a leader. Talk about that. Maybe that first experience we had, your first reports. How was that experience, and how did you, I think, get through that in a positive way?
I can kick it off and share a
Please.
couple of thoughts. Like I'll take it two different ways. From making that transition, from being an individual contributor to being in a leadership position, that was frankly way tougher than I anticipated it would be, because you work a pretty long time in many cases to sort of get to a place where you can make that transition. And over that time, you get really good at being, sort of executional, having a certain scope that's carved out for you, and you deliver against that scope. As you move into management, very quickly, your focus should become the people on your team and helping them sort of develop the skills that they want and meet their goals. And so that transition of really the way that your impact is measured and the way that you are successful was an important but challenging shift from my personal perspective, and more than I thought it would be, even though I'd sort of planned out my whole career expecting one day to move into management. And then I think the second piece of the question on like building teams, I would say that's another one that in my experience is very tough, and there's not any one sort of playbook that you can apply in every case. But in terms of things that I would say, advice that I would give, I'd say one, in my experience, both as a leader and being led, it's really hard to overinvest in this space in terms of thinking about your team, thinking about the type of people you want in your team, vetting people that you bring into the team. It's one of those things where you're sort of always in a rush because you have an open position, you want to get it filled, you've got team members that are feeling the pain of not having it filled, and so your tendency is, I need to rush and get this done. At the same time, the stakes for making the wrong decision there are pretty high, both for the individual that would be hired into a role that's suboptimal, but also you and the team as well. And so I don't think you can overinvest. And then the other thing I would say is you should really be conscious about challenging your own biases. And that's hard, but it's very important to make sure that you're not ending up with a team that's like, yeah, I've worked with James and 5 Jameses. That would feel good at the beginning, and then over time, that team would be pretty ineffective because we'd all have, the same blind spots, the same weaknesses. And so it's really about finding what are durable characteristics that you can assess that again will help the team be successful over time, recognizing that you can be respectful and have good energy and competent, and that can show up in a variety of different ways. That person doesn't always look the same. But the short answer to both of these questions is, in my experience, it's pretty tough and something that you're going to have to really invest a lot of time and energy in.
Yeah, if I could build on that, I think it definitely, I was also surprised at I think of myself as a people person, and so I found it took a lot of brain space of my own brain, like thinking about how I wanted to show up as a leader in the space, but also how I'm managing those relationships. In terms of building teams, one thing, an interesting experience I think I had was I became director in the middle of the pandemic when my team had actually been reduced to only me. So the Kennedy Center basically wasn't doing anything because nobody could sit in theaters because of the pandemic. And so I was a team of 1, and then was elevated and given the opportunity to hire 2 roles. So that was a really interesting first leadership experience, to build a team where the only team member was me, and to think exactly to those questions, James, of like, whose other brain do I want to add first to this dialogue? And then once you've hired the first person, then it becomes easier to find someone else who's a foil to who they are, or who brings a different skill set, or whatever that is, which felt like a very different experience when then one of the 2 team members I hired left after about 1.5 years to move on to another opportunity. And then there was an existing culture of the team that I was looking for someone to slot into, as opposed to building the culture from nothing. And I think the thing that surprised me most is I feel that the key to building a team culture has literally just been time spent talking with each other, and how much time that actually takes away from when you should be sending emails and having meetings and doing these things. Like, you need the time to figure out what questions your team members have, answer them honestly and transparently. Going back to what we said before, like explaining how the institution works and why we do things in this way. And it surprised me how many literal hours it took to do that, but how critical that was to building the team culture over time.
Kind of piggyback off of that, something that Jane was talking about is that like the informal settings of the team building is really important. So I don't have much experience within like any specific like director or organization, like in terms of career wise, but on campus activities, I'm involved with a nonprofit organization called KESAM, and we hold a camp for kids whose parents have had cancer. And one of my leadership roles within that organization is to interview, train, and be a liaison with the counselors. And so recently we had our interview process, and now we're starting on trainings. And so one thing that I've noticed as a volunteer coordinator and as a leader for this group is that, there's returning members who already have that culture, already have these like inside jokes from camp last year. But kind of emphasizing the fact that like everyone starts at somewhere. And at some point, those returners were also new members who were, first coming into the organization. And also the fact that we all kind of have the common goal, like we want this experience to be good for the kids. We want this experience, like it's all for the campers. And when you have that shared motivation, it kind of aligns the values of the team. And I really like that James talked about the diversity of personalities, because I think that's really important within teams, to have some sort of like clashing, because if you don't have that clash, then everything there's not going to be any improvement. And something about like the team and the leadership is that you always want to be like going in a upward direction. And even within hiring, I was the only returning student career advisor here at the Office of Career Development and Professional Engagement. And I participated in interviews with Kelly to hire our new team. And within those interviews, I really noticed that Kelly was great at figuring out how we're going to work as a team and how the different people that we're considering will collaborate the best and communicate the best with each other. So I really appreciated that. And that's something that I am going to consider when I am a leader in other positions.
Thank you, Lydia.
And I'll just, be brief here. I think, being patient in who you're hiring. I think, James and Jane both mentioned that. And I think that's pretty important because from a culture perspective and from a, timing perspective, like, if you better to make a good hire later than a bad hire sooner, let's say. But then also as far as transitioning from individual contributor to manager, I think you're more in a position of motivating and guiding, and particularly for, working with like recent grads. As an example, I was, working in investment banking and was working with analysts who were all incredibly analytically sound. They could make Excel dance. They could make PowerPoint dance. They could do anything, right? And they also wanted to, I establish trust, transparency with them. I knew they wanted to go to private equity, right, as the next job, right? And so, okay, I know you're doing this for 2 years and you want to go to private equity. What are the, help me figure out what you need to do or what you want to do in order to get there, right? And so, while they were very strong analytically, they needed more reps on around communication and just like talking with clients. And so I would, similar to my, manager Tara that I mentioned earlier, was putting them in positions to pitch to clients in whatever capacity. It could be like, these 2 slides, you own it. I'll work with you. I will practice, and you'll pitch it. I'll jump in, right? If like it, goes awry in some capacity, right? And to that point, right, like, a lot of them were very, very insistent on doing a great job and more worried about not messing up, that I would make sure to tell them and build the trust that, like, if anything goes awry, whether it be and you send something to a client or the model's busted or the PowerPoint is whatever, right? Like, I'll take the L, so to speak, and like, you're okay, right? And so of course we would want to avoid that, but making sure they're in a position that they're just focusing on doing their job, growing and developing, was like the key thing that I learned. And having, learning how to trust, and deal with those mistakes and trying to make those mistakes learning opportunities. So.
Absolutely. Be the leader that other leaders were to you, I think is one way to put it. Well, thank you, Lydia, Jane, Royce, James. That's our time. I really appreciate the conversation. Thank you for those excellent contributions. I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Kelly.
Again, thank you, Phil, serving as our moderator today, and also to all of our panelists, Lydia, Jane, Royce, and James, and committing the time and effort you put into preparing your thoughts for today and sharing your stories. We really appreciate all the lessons learned about ascending leadership roles and giving our audience ideas on how they can really take shape in their own paths. The stories that you shared today definitely provide examples of seeing the value of lessons learned in every experience, and being able to and finding the leader that you can find in each experience, where you can identify the aspects that will help you develop as a leader yourself as you continue to grow in your path. As Michael mentioned at the beginning of today's session, we have been working to incorporate the NACE career readiness competencies in each of these topics throughout the week. And I say y'all knocked it out of the park with leadership and professionalism today. There are examples throughout each of your stories. If you were taking notes today, I ask that you at least highlight one example that you are going to use for yourself and write down a next step for yourself moving on after today's session. You participated in the webinar today to learn and grow for yourself and make sure you can take some next steps for yourself in that process. With some tangibles on that, I'm going to pass it over to Alex Beard.
And thank you so much, Kelly. Well, thank you to the panel for joining us today, and thank you for being part of this session. I encourage you to join us a little bit later this afternoon at 3 p.m. Eastern Time for Modern Leadership Strategies for Inspirational Team Management. Today, we're on the leadership track. In addition, I want to make sure that everyone is just aware, so I'm going to quickly share my screen. We have a thread that's happening every single day on One Network where you can go in and you can share some key takeaways from today's session. So I'd love if anyone who's visiting for today's session, you glean something in particular, go ahead and drop it in as a comment to this particular pinned post. It would be really great if you're not already on One Network for you to join. It's ONE Network at .wm.edu. So thank you all so much for joining. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.